begin. My name is Shekufre. I'm the Global Technical Lead with the Early Childhood Development Action Network, and welcoming everyone to the Masterclass series. Sure, if you want to just keep going next based on what I'm saying, so I don't keep saying next, great. Thanks for everyone who joined us half an hour ago on a very exciting session. The first session in Theme 4 on equitable ECD systems change and evaluation, where we had a massive landscape overview of how we can do that. Recognizing Nork as the co-curator of the series. Next. So this systems thinking series is part of our broader systems thinking for early childhood initiative that we do it with ECDAN and Harvard with support from Porticus. And there are 4 pillars to our work. One is on systems research, systems investing, systems measurement, systems design and implementation. And this series is part of the systems measurement pillar. Finally, to earn the certificate, you need to complete at least 7 out of 14 and the associated surveys. We've had some clever folks complete surveys before sessions have even been started. So we will be looking at timestamps to ensure that those aren't done before the session is completed. Next. All right, and as always, if you go onto the Masterclass website, you will have access to everything that's been completed, including recordings and the resources that have been shared. Also, you can continue the chat on ECD Connect as well. Basic format of each masterclass, as most of you who have been attending, will be the welcome and introductions, the masterclass session itself, the dialogue with the early childhood expert, and participant Q&A. Okay, a quick housekeeping. I'm noticing actually a few people are chatting and you haven't selected everyone. When you do so, please do that so that everyone can see your messages. Don't select hosts and panelists. That's the default setting. And also for questions, we strongly encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A. You can vote on them, comment on them as well. Finally, if you need Spanish translation, click on the interpretation buttons, select Spanish. With big thanks to UNICEF LACRO for sponsoring the Spanish translation, and of course to Mitzi, who has been our incredible translator so far. Thanks, Mitzi. All right. So today we had session 7 that you can catch the recording if you missed it on equitable systems change, learning and evaluation methods with the Nork team and Hiro Yoshikawa. And now we're super excited to dive into using stories to drive systems change and learning. And I'm going to now introduce our speakers. Shreya, you can leave that slide on while I just go through the introductions. So we have with us Freya Bradford, the Director of Systems Change and Learning at Rotary Charities, which is a place-based foundation in Northwest Michigan. In this role, she partners with a diverse cohort of regional initiatives aimed at tackling the roots of complex problems by facilitating systems change grant category, community of practice, and systems change coaching pool. Jessica Conrad, who will be accompanying her, she brings over a decade of experience working at the frontiers of positive change for organizations like the Garfield Foundation, the Blekind Institute of Technology Forum for the Future School of Systems Change, and the REAMP Network. She currently supports purpose-driven people and organizations in a consulting capacity with coaching, facilitation, and custom offerings in the realms of leadership, research, and storytelling, organizational learning and development, and program design. And finally, our early childhood expert today, who is also the chair of ECDAN's Technical Advisory Group, who needs no introduction to most, is Dr. Mark Tomlinson. He's the co-director of the Institute of Life Course Health Research at Stellenbosch University. He is a professor of maternal and child health in the School of Nursing and Midwifery, Queen's University at Belfast, UK. His scholarly work is primarily interested in how to improve early childhood development, child and adolescent mental health, maternal mental health, and developing life course approaches to improving health. All right, with that, I hand it over to you, Freya and Jessica. Just a quick note to the panelists, if you guys can be mindful of time, our sessions have been going a little bit over. And secondly, if you can speak really clearly and loudly and slowly so that because simultaneous translation is also happening. All right, over to you, ladies.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the great introduction, Chekafé. We are so honored and delighted to be here with this amazing global network, and it's been great to see all the locations come in through the chat, and just to be a part of this series as a whole with these great teachers. It's just amazing opportunity for us. So our session, it's not advancing. Maybe there's a slight pause. Okay. We will put the slide up again at the end. We encourage you to contact us. You have our contact information. But for now, I'd like to just run through the session flow for today. So this is going to be really a case example of some of the theories and practices that you've heard throughout the series. It's going to show how we in our little corner of the region are applying some of these systems principles. I'm going to talk about how our foundation supports systems change, a little bit about our learning and evaluation kind of ecosystem overall, and how story has been a really important part of that. Jessica Conrad, we've been so fortunate to be able to work with her. She's going to be sharing a bit about ethical storytelling practices that she's used in our community and others, and share some systems change stories with you that we've been able to share with the community. And then finally, Mark is going to come in and help bring it home and bring it into context for the early childhood development community. So first, just a bit of context. Systems change is all about context, right? So we want to put this into place here for you. So we are based in Michigan. We're Rotary Charities. First, let me ask this. Rotary is probably a familiar term or a name for most of you or many of you. And we are, because of the size of this session, going to be using the chat and emojis and reactions. So I thought I'd just ask for reactions for anybody that has a Rotary Club in your region. Are you familiar with Rotary in any way? So just throw your favorite emoji out there. Oh, it's working. This is great. Okay, awesome. So lots of you. So there's Rotary Clubs all over the world. Our foundation is affiliated with our Rotary Club in the region, but we are unusual in that we actually discovered oil and gas on some property that the Rotary Club owned back in the 1970s, and they formed a foundation. So we have more resources than most Rotary charities in the world. So we're very fortunate for that. We are located, we serve across 5 counties. We're located on the ancestral territories of the Anishinaabeg people of the Three Fires Confederacy of the Ottawa, Chippewa, and Potawatomi Indians. We have about 170,000 people in our region, just to give you a sense of the scope that we're dealing with here. It's a beautiful region. It is, here, let me pull, I have a picture here. We're surrounded by fresh water. We're surrounded by inland lakes and farms and orchards. It's a pretty rural community in a lot of ways. But we also have an uncommon level of collaboration here. So we have about 1,000 nonprofits. We have about 30, or I'm sorry, I think 68 some units of government, lots of great businesses, faith communities, and lots of folks gathering in networks. Like this example you see of this is a recent picture of some new entrepreneurs kind of convened by an organization called Commonplace. Just taking in the landscape. So we're all very connected to this beautiful place. So we immediately have something in common when we come together. So this picture, if you've been in this series along the way, someone else shared this. This is just too perfect not to share again. This picture really speaks to kind of why we transform to support systems change approaches. We started the exploration in about 2016 because we felt like this. We felt like we were inside our 4 walls, all of the organizations that we were working with, most of them inside their 4 walls, and planning for a world that looked very different when we opened our doors. And it looked complex and messy. And we had a bit of an aha, like maybe there's a better way to do this. And somebody pointed out in one of the earlier sessions last week, I think, that systems thinking and systems change really starts when we begin to ask different questions. And that has been really true for us. So we started asking questions in our community. Is this the best we can do? Is there another way? Do you also want to make more progress on our complex community problems? Do you want to move beyond addressing consequences and get at some of the causes of these problems? So we did a lot of focus groups. We did some listening sessions and some design meetings. This was all 2016, 2017. And we eventually landed on something that we really co-created with the community. And they said, you know, what it's going to take for us to really make some progress on our complex issues is, one, we need to work together differently. All of those groups we mentioned before, nonprofits, units of government, faith-based communities, businesses, we need to come together. We need to collaborate. We need to co-create, build trust. We need to align our work, understand what each other is doing, kind of look at what's really causing these issues, which was quite different from what was happening up until then. And not only that, but we need to work on different things. This triangle probably looks familiar. I think this has been shared a couple times in the series. FSG put this out about 2018, which was perfect timing for us because it really helped to develop a common language. So the way that we see this is really, this is what we're working on. This is what we're trying to shift when we're trying to shift systems. So we're trying to look underneath the problem, the things that are causing the problem. So shifting policies and practices, the way that money and ideas and information flow, who's connected to whom, who's listened to, who has power in the system, and really ultimately like how we think about the problem, how we think about what's possible to solve the problem. So our mental models as well. So this was affirmed and co-created by our community. And this today still is how we think about our systems change work. So quickly, this is in 2018, we really formalized what we as a foundation are providing to support systems change. Let me ask this. So we'll do another little emoji as I'm talking. Are there any other funders in this room today? Any other folks, and funders or capacity builders like consultants or folks that offer services? Okay, we've got a couple coming in. Awesome. So we've got some raised hands. You can raise your hand. You can do a little emoji reaction. Oh, wow, lots. Great, awesome. So here's our collection of what we offer folks right now in the community. And this is constantly evolving as well. So right now we offer grants. So we offer smaller grants, $10,000 to $20,000 for early stages of systems change work. And I'll talk more about what I mean by that in a second. And larger systems change accelerator grants up to $150,000, 2 to 3 years. They're also renewable, more for the implementation, kind of when they're working on that triangle that we saw on the last slide. So they're trying to shift policies or practices. And then we also have some discretionary support. We do regular check-ins that we can pull on if needs come up. But we also heard as we were out in community that it's going to take more than money. If we're going to do this work right, we need more support. It takes different skills, different capacities. So we also offer systems change workshop series that we offer ourselves. We curate different learning opportunities. We have a learning fund that folks can tap into if there's costs associated that they need help to attend. We have some cohorts that are learning together, a newer systems change navigator cohort that's working with the School of Systems Change in the UK and then debriefing locally. So we're kind of building our own capacity to support the work through consultants here locally. And then finally, we convene a community of practice of all of our grantees. And you're gonna hear more about this as we go through, because this has really been one of the key places where we're sharing stories and where story has played a really important part in accelerating our work and moving us forward. We also have a consulting pool that Jessica is actually a part of, who you'll hear from in a second. We offer 10 hours of free systems change coaching to any grantee. They can take advantage of that if they'd like. They don't have to. And we have experts in lots of different areas. And Jessica works in the storytelling area. And that has been really one of our biggest topics that folks are interested in digging into. So we're super thankful for her and for the ability to have all these great resources. So quickly, just as an example, we're not going to dig into this example, but I wanted to let folks know, we have probably about 15 active grantees currently that are at different stages of systems change work. One of those grantees is within the issue area that we're talking about today, early childhood, and they're called Child Caring Now. And they are really working on a coordinated constellation of actions across the system to increase access to affordable, high-quality care and learning opportunities for young folks in our region. We're struggling, as I think probably most around the country, around the US, around the world, in really meeting the needs in the community for childcare. So they convened folks together a couple years ago, began exploring upstream of the problem, and developed what they're calling 4 solution pathways that you see on the screen, where they are organizing across sectors in action teams to support these 4 things. So they are concentrating on expanding the workforce. They're enhancing private provider sustainability, so really helping to make that business model more sustainable. They are trying to build system-wide capacity through shared services. So they're exploring how they can have shared service hubs across the system to save costs and build capacity, and then just overall supporting the system to be able to continue to convene and learn from one another. So I want to say, we're not going to talk more about this particular example, but if you do want to learn more about this, you can contact Norica. Her contact email is at the bottom of this slide. You will get this slide after the session. I'll ask another question while we're on this. Anyone working in a similar area trying to improve access to high quality care in the regions that you're working in? All right, Norica, your email is going to be blowing up. I think she might be on the call too. Awesome. Okay, well, I want to share this quickly. This is, the Child Caring Now group and all of the groups that we're working in take a little different approach, but they are all working in these 4 phases, we sometimes call these. Sometimes we call them strategies, but their work involves these 4 strategies. They're not linear. They're very dynamic. They're constantly moving through these. It's very iterative, but this is the way that we've broken down systems change processes or approaches, and it's helped to provide a common language and framework. And you'll see this reflected in the stories that Jessica's going to be sharing too. So folks are bringing folks together, like I mentioned, across sectors. They're exploring the problem. They're using a lot of the tools that you heard about if you've been in the sessions earlier last week, like causal loop diagramming and mapping, processes like 3 horizons and other tools you might hear mentioned to really explore what's causing the problem and how we can have impact on those causes. Then they're designing, implementing actions, they're experimenting, they're learning as they go, they're learning about each of these phases, and they're folding what they're learning back into what they're doing. So those are the 4 areas that have really helped us communicate and helped us tell these stories. So this learning series is all about evaluation and learning. I'm going to be completely honest with you and maybe ask you to be honest with me as well. We had no idea how we were going to transition from the evaluation strategies and practices that we were using to this new, to learn systems change, around systems change and evaluate systems change work and really see our impact. We didn't know. We didn't know what we were going to do. We knew that complex problems behave differently. I won't go through this in detail because I know some of the great folks last week that were laying the foundation went through a lot of this. We knew that they were dynamic and changing and multidimensional, multi-stakeholder, as we talked about, really uncertain, not linear, and really rooted in context and in human behavior. So we knew they were different. We didn't know what that meant, but we knew, okay, if they're different in those ways, we feel like our evaluation and learning processes and tools and approaches should really be adaptive, able to shift as things and the context changes. They should be something that everyone is using, so really participatory and integrated into the work, scalable, flexible, used in different ways, modified by folks, easy enough to do that, really respond to being experimental and iterative. Failure needed to be looked at differently, we knew, because we knew we were going to fail. We knew others were going to fail. We decided to think of it as, you know what, it's a good sign. It's a sign that we're trying new things and we're learning. And these tools needed to be culturally and contextually sensitive in lots of ways. So I wanted to bring this up because story in a lot of ways and storytelling has really helped check a lot of those boxes for us. We didn't know that at the beginning, but it's fit in very nicely. So what we did decide is that we were going to learn about how this was working in relationships. So we were going to do this in a community of practice together in the community. And really quick, you've probably heard folks talk about like double loop learning, triple loop learning. Well, here's how we think about learning now. Now that we're in the thick of it and we're learning all the time, we've like thrown out double loop, triple loop. It's more like this. So we have one person from one of our initiatives who just talks about it being spinny. It's just spinny. There's learning going on all the time, everywhere. It needs to be that way because there's so much happening in the community. And that learning is constantly getting folded in and changing things. And it is, it's more than triple loop. I don't even know. If I could make this 3-dimensional, I would make it 3-dimensional. So it looks, I was going to ask how many of you can relate, but I see the emojis flooding in. So I think this probably relates to how others are experiencing systems change work in general and learning especially, I think. So quickly, I want to give you a picture of our learning ecosystem before I turn it over to Jessica in just a second, to let you know where story sits in this ecosystem. This has been developed over time. It has been very emergent over time. Like I said, we didn't know what we were doing. We let it emerge over time in relationship. And we started with lots of needs assessment, as I mentioned, a big changemaker needs assessment. We created some educational offerings. We created that systems change community of practice. And yes, all of these things I see as a part of our learning and evaluation ecosystem. So we have processes and methods and tools and opportunities and resources all in one ecosystem. So we do program evaluations after our offerings. We do grantee final reports like we always did. They look a little different. We do more regular check-ins. So we're constantly in relationship with grantees and hearing from them directly. The community of practice early on created a tool themselves that's really measuring what they were starting to see as the habits of a systemic mindset. So they realized that mindset factor applies to us and the folks in the system and how we need to shift the way that we see the work as well. So that's a great tool that they developed and continue to use. We have systems change coaching, as I mentioned. And then about 18 months ago, the community of practice said, we want to begin to tell these stories. This idea of creating the stories that you're going to hear about from Jessica came from them. We created a publication that you'll learn about and a video as well. And this is right in the center and it's shaded because it's been so impactful. We use those stories in a community celebration that you'll hear a bit more about. Our board has been using it to learn themselves. We've been sharing it like we're doing today with the field, and it's helped us kind of weave and build with the field more and helped those stories that were in Stories of Change share with their funders and their stakeholders as well. So it helped them connect as well. And then we're weaving, these arrows are just to let you know, we're weaving that back into, so as I learn and weave with the field and I meet new folks, we're bringing those folks and ideas back into the work as well. Sometimes they're guests in our community of practice and sometimes they offer educational offerings as well. So it is truly an ecosystem where these processes are interconnected. We developed some reflection guides as well. We have a new navigators learning cohort that I mentioned. Oops. Sorry. And we're going to be experimenting with some new tools, and we're going to continue to evolve this over time in the future. So what are we able to see from all of these methods, especially story? What has it showed us? What are the patterns that are emerging? And really, we see these signs of change in kind of these 4 pillar areas. So we're seeing lots of individual change, mindset shifts about what's even possible. Can we solve our complex problems? What's our most fitting role in the system? That seems to be shifting as we get into this work. Whose voices count? Who do we listen to? How do we weave new voices into our work and share power? Who's accountable for what and to whom is shifting? We're moving accountability outside of organizational boundaries into a larger community, often directly to the community in new ways. And, we're really prioritizing contribution over attribution. I don't know if this has come up yet. My evaluation background used to be much more about attribution, really figuring out what caused what. We're not worried about that anymore. We're all contributing to what we see on the screen today and what's happening in the community. So we're seeing skill change, we're seeing understanding of complexity, we're seeing folks able to use and balance tension. I won't go through all of these for the sake of time. You can definitely revisit this slide too. But I think the big takeaway is there's individual changes, there's changes in how folks are working, who they're working with, how they understand the problem, how they're working experimentally. And we're definitely seeing some shifts in those system factors as well. So new policies and power shifts, new resources, lots of new resources are being leveraged to the work, which is fantastic. Shifts in media messages and public discourse. And most importantly, all of this is really leading to sustained change, which is just incredibly exciting to see. The 3 examples you see up here are really the 3 that are featured in Stories of Change, but there's more than that. So we'll be creating more stories, I think, in the future. So we've seen a huge increase in fresh food that's available to folks in the community. Our youth homelessness population has reached functional 0. It's incredible. And millions can be attributed to healthcare savings. Those are 3 different initiatives that you'll hear a bit more about in just a second. So I want to ask for another emoji reaction. Are these things that you're seeing in your systems change work as well? Are you starting to see some of the same things? I thought so. That's awesome. That's exciting. It's really exciting to see. We're all, one of the things we found in the community of practice is we're all working on different issue areas, but there's so much commonality. We're all from different parts of the world, but we're seeing similar things, which is just fantastic. So I want to turn it over to Jessica just for a few minutes. She's going to share some definitions around story. We're going to transition now a little bit more into how we're using story to help us see these things. So Jessica, you want to take it away for a couple minutes?
Awesome. Thank you for it. Every time you present the story of Rotary Charities, I'm always more and more inspired by the work that you all are doing. So thank you. And thanks for turning it over to me. As Freya suggested, we want to spend just a couple quick minutes creating shared understanding about what story is and the role that it's played over time before we get kind of more into the weeds about, how story is really supporting Rotary Charities and their community. So at the individual level, I really like this quote from Gregory Kahate. At the individual level, story is one of the most basic ways that the human brain structures and relates human experience. This quote really speaks to me. And then the next I'd love to share is speaks to more of a systemic level. So stories make, prop up, and bring down systems. Stories shape how we understand the world, our place in it, and our ability to change it. So as you can see, these two quotes I really love as kind of initial framing because they suggest that story is really working across multiple levels of the system. So let's take a closer look now at what stories are. Stories are individual, meaning that they can stand alone and they can engage and inspire. right? So they really hold the power to engage our emotions, or engage our imaginations, evoke emotions, influence worldviews, beliefs, and behaviors. Does that resonate with you all? I love these emojis coming in when you think of stories. Hopefully this speaks to you and your experience of engaging and working with stories. Okay, so now let's zoom out just a bit more. So narrative, I'm sure many of you have heard the word narrative, and perhaps some of you work with narrative. Narrative is actually a collection of stories. So this means that stories can actually be connected together into narratives that spread at scale and over time, right? And so this leads to a deeper kind of sense and meaning making. One way to think about narrative is that it's essentially the fabric of our culture. So how do stories and narrative really come into being? Storytelling plays a critical role. And I'd like to share that from a cultural anthropology perspective, storytelling is actually our oldest technology, right? So it's that tool to create meaning. For hundreds and hundreds of years, Indigenous communities around the world have engaged in storytelling processes where whole communities actually come together to co-create narratives that give meaning to their lives and the world around them, right? So people's understanding of reality has essentially evolved through this process of collective meaning making, and storytelling is really at the heart of that. So as you can see here, storytelling today really continues to shape our perception of reality, our worldviews, beliefs, and values. So storytelling is also how we select, sequence, moralize, accept, and integrate difference. So there's a lot there, and I'm going to spend just a moment unpacking that. So selecting, right? So it's about how we consider an experience and choose what's important out of the information that we gather in everyday life, all of those experiences, what's important. Sequencing, right, is about ordering the experiences and information to create coherent narratives. And in systems change, through that lens, it makes sense that when we sequence, we often assign cause and effect. I'm not sure if that's come up in other sessions during the series, but that's a concept that we work with a lot in systems change. Storytelling is also about moralizing, right? So it's assigning value to choices and actions, and then it's about integrating difference. So noticing changes and patterns, right? So how is the system shifting over time? And then the last here, story is essentially the foundation of our culture and our communities. So as you can see, storytelling is really critical, right, to how we kind of make sense of the world and move through it. And for me, it's really interesting to reflect on storytelling as a process, right, as a verb. So it is something that we do together, which begs the question, right, of who's listening to the stories being shared, and importantly, how are they listening? So I'd like to introduce story listening as one frame. So to me, this is really about and I see in the chat a really important point. Yes, of course, storytelling is misused to manipulate. And I thank you for bringing that in. We, in a few minutes, are going to dig into what does ethical storytelling look like. So that's one way of kind of combating, how can we make sure that we're not misusing the stories that we have. So thank you, Ian, for bringing that in. So back to story listening. This is a frame for thinking about how do we listen with the intention to understand, right? So this is a generative practice, really grounded in a posture of like humility, empathy, heart-centeredness. You can do the next. Thank you, Freya. It involves listening with curiosity to suspend judgment. And it's not a means to an ends, right? So it's about engaging the process and listening to the stories being told. It's actually a practice that requires practice, right? And especially in the context of systems change, it's a practice that we can actually use over time as we're working to shift systems toward more justice and equity. So that's just a bit about some definitions to help us kind of get grounded. And now I'm going to pass it back over to Freya to talk about here. how we are catalyzing systems change with story.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica. That's so helpful to ground us. I see folks raising hands, and I just wanted to encourage folks, if you do have questions, to put them in the Q&A section, and Mark will help us go through some of those at the end. I'm not sure if the hands raised are questions or not, but I just wanted to acknowledge that. So story is helping us to both chronicle and catalyze systems change. So it's helping us share the narratives of these stories more broadly in the community. It's also helping us accelerate or catalyze our own systems change work. And I'll explain a bit more about how we see that happening and what we're doing, because I think it is something that's very replicable across a lot of different contexts. So we really see story as helping create that common language. It's helping folks connect with one another, so helping others understand each other in our community of practice and in the community more broadly. It's helping us see and surface patterns and challenges so that we can all be more responsive to those, so that we can see the system, as Otto Scharmer likes to say, which is just what seems to be happening through story in our region. And it really is, a story has been very inspiring for folks. This work is hard, it takes a long time. There's many points that I'm sure all of us have felt like, you know what, let's just go back to business as usual. Let's just do projects. Let's not worry about this. So story helps us see that a different future is possible. It's happening, it's been done. It opens the windows to new possibilities. So I will move through this rather quickly so that we definitely have more time to dig into story. But this is where we wanted to share this, because I feel like what we're doing in our region doesn't cost a lot. It's not crazy, it doesn't take a lot of capacity necessarily. It's something that I think that if you're an academic on the call, if you're a funder on the call, if you're a practitioner on the call, and you could all do these three things. So we see ourselves as really building those story listening and storytelling capacities that Jessica talked about. We are creating space to have a space, like a literal space in our community, to share stories for folks to practice listening. And we're creating some very simple processes that I will talk about quickly today that enable those stories to be shared in a way that they can be useful. And then we're also amplifying. So we have a large audience as a foundation. We, as I mentioned, are connecting with the field. So we're using our networks to amplify these stories. We're celebrating with our own community as well, to try to spread that inspiration and get more folks interested in the work. So we're building capacity through workshops, through coaching. And a tool here that I won't go into too deeply, but you can check out, that is deceptively simple. We started using it here and there. We're using it everywhere now. It's called What, So What, Now What, and basically helps you take kind of insight and move from insight into adaptation and new action in a really simple, fast way that can keep kind of real-time adaptation going within any initiative. It doesn't have to be systems change. We use it within our organization all the time. So there's a link to that. There's lots of folks talking about this tool and using it, but this link is for the Human Systems Dynamics Institute. So this is a picture of our community of practice. This community of practice has really been the key place where we're internally sharing stories. This is what I call maybe like using story kind of on a micro level. And we do that each time we meet. We don't do all of these things, but we will do one or two of these things. So we ask folks to come and share stories about either a challenge of practice, so something that's been difficult in their work, and an artifact of practice is a bit like show and tell, or a sign of change. So I won't spend time talking about this because I did write about it, and it is linked to with the session materials. But this is a place for people to practice what Jessica's talking about, like storytelling and also story listening and supporting each other as a community of peers and just sharing new ideas about what works. So this has really been the place to accelerate practice. And this picture here is the first time that we shared. So Stories of Change, the publication that Jessica's going to talk about in a minute, was launched back, not last January, but the January before, into our community. This is a big celebration we did. I think almost 300 people attended to hear directly from some of the folks mentioned in Stories of Change, some of the stories that they shared. Jessica's on the stage there. You can't see, I'm on the stage. It was a celebration. It was a huge community event, a huge success. We also made space for all of the initiatives to kind of gather around and do poster presentations, kind of like what you see down in the corner there, and share about their work. So even if they weren't featured in Stories of Change, it was like an expo style kind of event, which has been really successful for us in lots of ways. So with that, I'm going to stop my share, and Jessica's going to take over the driver's seat and take us through Stories of Change. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Fran. And just as I'm transitioning here to my own slide deck, I'm just acknowledging all the amazing ideas coming through the chat about how storytelling is so useful in your context, in the early childhood development context. So thank you for sharing those ideas. Please keep them coming. I love how this is turning into a little bit of a community of practice for you all around storytelling. So as Freya mentioned, I think you can see my screen. Freya, can you see? Perfect. Okay, thank you. So as Freya mentioned, I'm planning to share just a little bit about what Stories of Change is, the publication that we produced. And then I'm going to talk more about, the process of creating these stories, really focusing on what was the ethical storytelling practices that we used. So a peek under the hood, so to speak. And then Freya is going to bring us to a close as we reflect on the impact of these stories for Rotary Charities and their partners and more. So if that sounds okay, that's how we're going to proceed. So what is Stories of Change? So this publication that I authored for Rotary Charities includes 4 stories of change. The first is actually about Rotary Charities' internal transformation. So the work that they did as a team and as a board that really led them to be prepared to develop their Systems Change Accelerator program area that Freya has spoken about. And the next 3 stories tell the story of 3 separate multi-stakeholder initiatives that are focused on complex issues, including youth homelessness, food insecurity, and health equity. So all of this work is place-based, unfolding across the 5-county region that Freya introduced earlier. So that's just a preview of what the publication includes, and you are more than welcome to actually use this QR code to access the publication and read it if you'd like to take a look at the stories that it includes. The purpose, I do want to start here, tell you a little bit about the purpose of Stories of Change. Why did we produce it? Freya also, touched on this in her section, but I wanted to share and reinforce that Rotary Charities really wanted to share these stories to empower new forms of change making locally, but also to contribute their learning to the field of systems change, so that others might learn from their experiences in this region. We noticed a gap, right, in the field around the amount of experimentation with systems change practices and the examples that were available. So that was one of the kind of driving motivators for putting these stories together. So, what did we really hope to do with this publication? We really hoped to better understand and share more broadly how the initiatives approached each phase of the process that Freya introduced earlier, right? So what was the work of systems change? How did it really unfold? What did it look like from multiple stakeholders' perspectives, from community members' perspectives? That was what we really sought to understand with our research. So I set out to gather the perspectives and experiences of 35 individuals who participated in these initiatives or benefited from the services of these initiatives. And to do that, I organized interviews and focus groups that were really designed to support mutual learning and connection through the process. And to do that, I used ethical or equitable storytelling practices. So that's what we're going to dig into now. Can I just see a reaction? Are folks familiar with ethical storytelling practices? Is this something that you've perhaps used yourself?
So Jessica, I just wanted to say, because there are no negative emojis, I
Yes.
think people don't know how to say that they're not. So I think some are using the surprised face as if they are not. So just FYI.
Awesome. Thank you. That's really helpful interpretation of the emojis. But I do see, okay, so I see some folks who this will be new to, which is wonderful. And I'm seeing some who are also familiar. Those who are familiar, I welcome you to add your ideas to the chat so that we could kind of co-create some understanding here. But I'd like to offer a definition about ethical storytelling from Resource Media, right? So they define this practice as an ongoing and collaborative process that really values relationship building between the person gathering the stories and the participant storyteller, the people who are being interviewed, that moves at the speed of trust and, importantly, moves at the speed of consent, right? It's a consensual process. This practice is also one that defers to the knowledge of the storyteller, really incorporating their expertise at the beginning of the whole process, right? So it's almost a co-created storytelling and story listening process. And then last, ethical storytelling sees people as multifaceted, really whole human beings, and asks, what stories are you telling and what power are you using to tell them? And how do people really want their own stories to be told, right? So ethical storytelling, in other words, is about really creating the conditions for people to feel empowered and for their stories to be portrayed both with strength and dignity, right? So in my experience, ethical storytelling practices can help lead to, more nuanced, more human, and thus like more powerful stories, which is really critical in the context of systems change work. As we know, it's highly nuanced, highly complex terrain. So I'm going to dig into now some ethical storytelling practices, and I suspect that a lot of these could already be part of your approach for those who gave a thumbs up. And I invite you to continue using the chat as I go through these. So here are a couple practices for you. So the first is to acknowledge each participant as really the expert of their own story. So this is really an orientation and a mindset that we can adopt, no matter what your entry point is into gathering information and telling stories. If you're a writer, an evaluator, perhaps a different kind of practitioner, this is relevant, I think, to many of us who go in and work with story. So in practice, this looks like bringing the participant into the story creation process right at the very beginning. So we can bring questions and a possible story structure in our minds, right? But treating the process as a collaborative one, being really flexible and adaptive is critical, right? So through this, we're really deferring to the participant storyteller's knowledge of their own experience. The next practice is to seek deep and continuous consent. If you have ideas for what this means, I'd love to see them in the chat. What does this mean in the context of your work? From my perspective, when we go into communities to gather participants' stories, sometimes people feel like they have to participate. They must participate, especially if they were a beneficiary of services that were funded. And so what's really critical is to continuously reinforce that people actually do have a choice to participate or not, right? And then to seek explicit consent to participate for those stories to be shared. So to do that, what's needed is simply a transparent conversation with each participant about how the story is going to be used, how the story is going to be shared, where it's going to be used, et cetera. So it's really critical to make sure that the participant knows that if at any point in the process they no longer feel comfortable with the story, that they can withdraw their consent at any point. And then, of course, once the story has been produced, We need to ask each participant, does this accurately reflect your story and your perspective? Did we miss anything? Do you feel comfortable sharing the story with your intended audience? Is there anything you'd like to change? Right. So that's all part of the process of seeking deep and continuous consent. Another really important piece is to create safe containers for your participant storytellers, right? So consider what it might look like to create safety for your participants leading up to, during, and after the process of collecting or sharing, publishing the stories that you gather. This is going to look different for every community or individual that you work with, more than likely. The next one is to adopt a beginner's mindset. I see a bunch of really great things coming through the chat, and I haven't been able to read them all, but please know that we are going I'll take a pause and read them, but please keep coming. And if you have a definition for a beginner's mindset, I'd love to see it in the chat. For me, bringing a beginner's mindset is all about really encouraging ourselves to show up kind of not knowing, right? So letting go of any preconceived thoughts. It's really about practicing taking the perspective of someone else, like someone else's, stepping into someone else's shoes is what I mean to say. So we're working to prevent the belief that we are experts as perhaps the person gathering the stories, because we don't actually already know what's happening in the system from the participant's perspective. If we go in with that mindset that we are the expert, that can really, of course, prevent true understanding and have real consequences for us as writers, evaluators, and for the stakeholders or community members themselves. The next practice is really to lead with curiosity. So this circles back to the practice of story listening. It's about bringing humility, practicing deep listening, listening with our whole selves, suspending judgment. There's a lot of theory out there about how to listen well. So I would encourage you to look for that. The next one, I really love this one, especially in the context of systems change. It's to look beyond the obvious story, right? So seek out and capture multiple diverse perspectives, especially the ones that have less exposure, right? So there is an implicit power dynamic at work when we gather stories. And that is the perspectives that we invite and amplify are privileged over the ones that we don't include. So we really need to take care when we're selecting the perspectives that we uplift, right? So how do we give a wider group of people the chance to offer their points of view on what happened? So really, once you do gather the work of gathering these multiple diverse perspectives, we need to look beyond the kind of sweeping arcs or the obvious storylines for the smaller, more complex or more nuanced moments that you can focus your questions on and really evoke kind of the story of what happened, tease out the story of what happened. Use empowered writing. I'm not going to say a lot about this here, but one thing to keep in mind is to really write person and strength-centered stories. There's a practice called asset framing, which is defining people by their strengths. I really recommend looking into that. I can drop a link into the chat when I'm finished speaking, but Travian Shorter's, his work on asset framing is one to really to take a look at. Next, avoid simplifying dramatization and stereotypes, right? We're trying not to oversimplify. One way of making sure we don't do this is actually to familiarize yourself with stereotypes that might be present in the issue that you're working to communicate about or in the community, so that you can then avoid them in your work. So taken together, these are a lot of practices, but taken together, they can really help us as writers in collecting and crafting ethical stories that reveal complexity and nuance, right? That include historical and systemic contexts, and that honor the dignity and voice of participant storytellers, while also connecting emotionally with the audience, right? So As a writer or evaluator, once you've gathered all of these wonderful perspectives, then what do you do, right? How do you craft a story that reflects an ethical practice? So with Stories of Change, Freya and I worked really closely to develop a framework for the stories that would capture the complexity of the work and really center its relational nature. Interestingly, I came across the resource mentioned in the footer here after writing Stories of Change, and I found that their frame for an ethical storytelling structure really matched what we did with Stories of Change. So I'll just go through that quickly in the hope that this is of interest to you. So when you're writing ethical stories, it's good to include, a summary, right? Talk about the community's assets, their shared values, their goals. This is part of the context of the work that's unfolding. And then leads into I think the systemic context, right? So what is the current historical and systemic context giving rise to the challenge? And following that, we really need to uplift the community's assets and strengths, again, taking an asset framing perspectives. And for Stories of Change, this is where I really introduced participants, storytellers, and started unpacking the relationships between them, their work, and the wider community to which they belonged. Then highlight collaborative action, right? So this is where we really get into the heart of the story or what happened by highlighting multiple perspectives, which might even sometimes be conflicting, right? So it's about revealing again the complexity and nuance of the work. For us in Stories of Change, this meant really looking at, what are the upstream causes of the work, and then how are the multi-stakeholder initiatives designing and implementing actions to try to shift the systems that they're working within. And then finally, sustaining success. So one of the challenges with more traditional frameworks for storytelling is that they assume that the work is done when it's done. But as I'm sure we all know, that the work of addressing these really complex problems like youth homelessness or climate change or et cetera, the work will continue right after a story is published, after your evaluation report is complete. So this is really for us where the learning and adaptation phase, the green bubble here on the screen, comes into play, right? Learning and adaptation is critical to a systems approach, and applying it in an ongoing way is what can help sustain success and forward momentum in shifting systems over time. So all of this to say that the 4 phases here on the screen that Freya introduced earlier became the organizing frame for each of the stories that are in the publication Stories of Change. We encourage you to take a look at that. And of course, would love to hear your reactions when you have a chance. I have just one more idea I wanted to add for you all before I turn it back over to Freya. And that is, when doing the work of sharing stories for systems change, there's one other nugget I'd love to leave you all with that can help communicate complex stories and their relational nature. And that is attending to 3 levels of story and how it unfolds over time. So the first level is about the individual, the single person, right? It's the experience of your participants, storytellers. This shows up in language. You can tune into it because it shows up in the language that you hear and that you work with as a writer, right? So this is kind of the realm of first person language, I or me. It's if I were the participant storyteller, it's telling about my experience. The second level of story is this interpersonal level. It's the level of the community, and it's where second person language shows up, right? It's the we, it's the you, that's our collective doing this work together. And then the last level is the systemic level. So this is the level of the system out there, right? So it could be the youth serving system, for example. It's the level of the narrator, right? So it's about the data of the story, and it shows up in third person language. It's they. So just a cue for you all that there are different perspectives at play, not just within the multi-stakeholders you might be working with, but also in the levels of the system. And the story can help, weaving these three different perspectives can help create a deeper sense of meaning. So I'll offer just a quick example. So here and this is from the publication, the Healthy Food Access Partnership Story. Here's one quote from a participant storyteller named Annika Wegman. She says, "Our meetings start with a review of our community agreements, which remind us how to be decent to each other. I love it. It's been good for my personal life too." So as you can see, tuning in here, we're seeing the pronouns of I, right? She's talking about her personal experience. So this is the level of the individual. The level of the interpersonal level, the community level. Here's an example from Val Stone, who says, "We are stronger together. We don't concern ourselves with who gets credit for what. Instead, we each do our part. Our goal isn't to benefit our individual groups, but to support our neighbors," right? So she's using that second person language, talking about the we of the collective work of shifting systems. And then finally, during the first year of the pandemic, the Healthy Food Access Partnership facilitated over $100,000 in purchases of 70,000 pounds of locally grown produce. So this is the voice of the narrator offering the systemic perspective. And I know I moved through this swiftly in the interest of time, but I hope that these three examples kind of illustrated what I was talking about on the earlier slide. So all of this adds up to the systems change stories that you can find in the publication, Stories of Change. Our hope is that, these stories are really rooted in context, that they honor the work and the relationship building that has been done leading up to the systems change effort. The stories center people and relationships, right? As part of, like, those people are part of the systems that they seek to shift toward more equitable and just outcomes, right? The stories hopefully reveal complexity and nuance, the complexity of systems change work. They reflect emergence, which is nonlinear. And importantly, these stories enable shared learning as a change strategy in and of themselves. So I'm again moving kind of swiftly here so that I can pass it back to Freya, and we have enough time for questions. So Freya, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you, and but I'm happy to share this last slide. Shall I do that?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you so much, Jessica. There was so much love coming through the chat for you and what you shared, and just I can't stress enough how transformative it has been for us to work with Jessica and to center stories, both big stories like stories of change, but also just the everyday stories that we're centering in our community of practice. It's really been transformative. It's accelerating our learning, our adaptation. It is a tool. It has become a strategy. It's no longer just a communications mechanism. It is part of our strategy for systems change itself. So can't underscore that enough. So these stories have really become shared artifacts. They are shared between our foundation and the communities that shared the stories, the initiatives that share the stories. They were compensated for their work. They didn't have to, they got lots of copies, digital copies. They're sharing the artifacts on their own for their own purposes. We're sharing as well. And it's been fantastic to watch where Stories of Change has gone and what it's done for folks. So been a shared artifact, and also, as you heard, I think just reiterating, really a tool for seeing the system, for celebrating, for inspiring, shifting that cultural narrative about what can we do. It's been a tool for shared reflection for our staffs, our boards, and this is the collective hour in this case, our community, and then really just starting to build locally and globally like we're doing today. So it's been an incredible tool. There might be one. Is there one more? No. Ah, yes, coming soon. We will be working with Jessica. She, I think, probably has some free time too, but we are working with her to do another Stories of Change, where we will update the 3 stories you'll read about in the first edition and then feature 2 new stories. So look for that probably in about a year, because this takes time, as you might expect. So thank you, Jessica. And I'm excited to bring in Mark for your reflections on how this can really be used in ECD work, and excited to see what questions we can answer through the Q&A. So thank you.
But firstly, just to say enormous thanks to Jessica. You can see by the response, by how many people are on the call, just in the webinar, just to say thank you for an amazing talk. And also I can see the number of questions and answers. So I'm going to try and keep what I want to say quite brief, because I think it'd be nice for some questions. I love that first slide that you put up with the chaos, all the little buttons there, and all the lines going, and then inside the room everyone's got this A to B, and it did remind me, if I can still find it, I had it open and I don't know where it's gone now. But it reminded me of something that I've often spoken about, used this little story myself in presentations, and I thought I'd just repeat it now. So here goes. There's a man in a hot air balloon. He's looking down and he sees another person walking in the field. He shouts down, "Hey, you, where am I?" Person on the ground answers, "You're in a hot air balloon, suspended vertically about 200 feet above the ground with no visible means of descent." Person in the hot air balloon is, "You must be a researcher, an academic." "Yes, how did you know?" "Well, you're full of technically correct information that is entirely irrelevant to my current situation." Person on the ground responds, "You must be a policymaker." "Well, yes, how did you know?" "Well, you don't know where you are, you don't know what to ask to find out what you need, and you're blaming other people for your current situation." And I think that sums up sometimes this sort of this disconnect between people on the ground, researchers and policymakers, and I just love that diagram. Another piece that I really liked was I think it was you, Jessica, who mentioned the primacy, and I think it goes to the storytelling. It goes to the role of community. It goes to curiosity, modesty, not going in as the expert, but one of my mentors always had this thing that they taught me, and it's about change. And she used to talk about it with respect to people. And I've often used this in how we think about change with parents, change in families, and particularly change with children that have experienced adversity and are struggling. And we want to make things better, and we want to do it quickly. And she always said to me, and I like this, and it was people, and I just want to throw in here based on what the two of you have said. So people and systems change slowly, over time, in small steps, in a relationship, with lots of opportunities to practice. And I think anytime we try and think that it can happen faster than that, I think we are probably deluding ourselves. A number of people talked about in the discussion where they were also talking about stories, both around stories and systems, but then what about stories in the lives of children, and what do stories mean to young children, to families? I've been quite involved over a number of years in developing interventions around shared reading. And we've done this with young children as young as 12 months old. And it's less about, particularly with the very young children and their caregivers, it's actually very little about literacy, although it may be part of the foundational part, but a lot of it's about relationship. It's about engagement. It's about turn taking. And I think that's one of the, almost like the direct metaphor for me with a lot of what you're saying, is that there's something profound with having someone else engage with you in a respectful way, with curiosity, which you spoke about, Jessica, very eloquently in the way you were talking about the stories, but in a sort of one-to-one interaction between a caregiver and a child. I think it's exactly the same thing. It's about turn taking. It's not about taking over. It's not about the caregiver sort of trying to find the solution for the child, which is what parents often do. You know, a child comes with a difficulty and they, well, this is what you should do. And this is the answer. Well, in fact, no, what they really need you to do is hear them and then see you maybe struggling just a little bit. And if you're getting frustrated, maybe help just a little bit, but that sort of zone of proximal development. And I think there's so many similarities in just that single one-on-one engagement to what systems change may need. So we often want to teach because we know, forgetting how we got to that point and how we had to learn. So I thought that was really, really important. And just reiterate this idea of not knowing. Is I'm based in South Africa and I'm a clinical psychologist by training. And during the apartheid years, clinical psychology there was a lot about giving what we call giving psychology away, as in who we to say what's best for other people. We recently celebrated Freedom Day in South Africa on Saturday, which is the 27th of April. So it's 30 years after our democratic elections. And after that, we went into communities trying to give psychology away. And we made the mistake, and this is what I just wanted to, it can also be, the not knowing can be pushed a bit far, because people then also said to us, well, of course you don't, but you also do know some stuff. And so it's not so much about you coming and telling us what to do, but it's also not you assuming that we know how to do, because actually we're in some ways in quite a lot of distress. So can we form an equitable partnership? And you talk and I talk, you listen, I listen, you learn, I learn. And I think that's quite a of both working at that very proximal level between a caregiver and a child, and perhaps at a more distal level between a community and someone else. There was one other, my last thing, and then I'll stop because it would be nice to get some questions. Is what I really like is in many parts of the world, the nurturing care framework, improving early child development, in many places is actually quite new, and developing research and results about that is relatively new. And as a result, a lot of the focus has been on single interventions, single programs, often once off. And I do think and I think the timing, and this is thanks to Shikufe and Elizabeth and Shreya and everyone at Egg Day, and I think the timing is perfect for these masterclasses, because I think the field's ready for the complex system view. There's enough evidence, I think, that we can now start, instead of having a single branded intervention to improve early child development, we can say, well, we now have enough evidence to say these are the common elements of something, and this we know helps families, helps children, and we need to move more to that and to thinking in a more holistic, broader way. So yeah, and also just, sorry, I keep saying, but one final thing, I found the masterclass just amazing. This one thing is that so many of the words one talks about with systems, non-linear, multidimensional, complex, you really could be talking about children and their development. It is that simple, is that children, we like to think they develop beautifully in this A to B way. They don't. It's back, it's up, it's down, it's backwards, it's jumping a lot of way forwards or whatever. And we have to be mindful and respectful of that. So yeah, so thanks again. It was really amazing. And yeah, and I'll definitely go back and relook at it at some later point. So I'm going to go and sort of hand over back to whoever's going to chair the questions. I don't know if that's me or is it
Thanks,
Shikufe?
Mark. Yeah, we can do it together, Mark. We can do it together. You can want it to, both of us can look at the Q&A and see what pops up. But I'm curious, Freya and Jessica, if you have any reactions to what Mark said while we were pulling up questions. There's some really fantastic questions in the Q&A. And sorry, my video is off. We have a power outage, so I'm just sitting in the dark, so you won't be able to see much. But yeah, go ahead, Freya and Jessica.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Mark, for those reflections. They were all just really wonderful to listen to and hear how this landed with you, what was standing out. I think I got most excited towards the end when you said, you know what, this is a lot like raising a child. And yes, I have 2 teenagers, and I often talk about how it's like the best education in working in systems change, trying to be a parent to both of them and understand their worlds and talk about constantly changing. I mean, they're constantly changing dynamic beings, and therefore I have to be constantly changing and adapting my approach as well. The parallels are uncanny, and actually the group, and Norica's on the call, and I think some others from the Child Caring Now group, when they came into the community of practice, I saw each of them say, well, this is what we do. We just do it with children. Like, oh, this is fantastic. You're going to be right at home here. That's wonderful.
Oh, that's awesome. I love hearing that. And I can just chime in quickly to say, I saw in the chat that someone, you, Mark, summed up your own definition of systems change and the practices required in a really wonderful way. And someone was asking for it, and I really appreciated it. So I'm going to share what I captured, which was change happens slowly over time with small steps, and it requires the opportunity to practice as we go. So I just wanted to lift that up again. There were so many wonderful points that you stood up to, Mark. So thank you for your reflections. And I hope that definition was helpful to the person who was asking for it in the chat.
Amazing. All right, let's get into some really juicy questions, because there's some really excellent questions. And in fact, there's a really powerful conversation also happening about systems thinking itself and how we're approaching it, that I think it would be a great conversation to have. So one, these questions open to Freya, Jessica, Mark, and Mark, if you're looking at the questions and something pops out at you, please also feel free to just jump in. So one question is directed to Jessica, but again, anyone. Can you talk more about moving at the speed of consent? When telling stories ethically, what does it look like when that happens? What does it look like when we get excited and jump the gun, i.e. move too fast?
Thank you. That's a really, really wonderful question. I just had it up and it shifted. I'm finding it again. But yeah, I mean, what does it look like when we do move at the speed of consent and trust? I think it looks and feels like building a relationship with the people who you are gathering stories from, right? So it's going in and saying, this is what we're setting out to do. Do you feel comfortable with that? Are you willing to share your story? And do these conditions feel safe to you? So at the outset, it's about asking those quick questions, creating a container, but really building a relationship, I think, that's built on trust. And I think we all, at least I can speak for myself, my experience is that trust takes time to build. So it's about moving slowly and setting up, even if you're only having 1 or 2 conversations with a participant storyteller, it's about moving slowly at the beginning so that they really understand what they're being invited into, that they can centrally say, yes, I want to be part of this, and then kind of moving on to the questions that you might have for them if you're interviewing them, for example. So jumping the gun or moving too quickly, like what might that look like? I think it's probably operating out of assumptions that people want to participate and just diving right in, right? You might have a lot of excitement for your project, and that's wonderful. But I think it's important to really invite someone to share that with you and also feel safe enough to do so. So perhaps I'll stop there. Freya or Mark, please feel free to chime in.
Well, I was just going to add from a very practical standpoint, I think it's like maintaining flexibility with deadlines, things like that. I think in the beginning, maybe in Stories of Change, we were anticipating a certain number of reviews that people would get with the story, if you remember right, and then we would be done and it would be ready for publication. And of course, we had our printers standing by waiting. We had like a holiday coming up, and we were very ready to get something to a printer, but the folks in one particular story, it was like, wait, we need to talk more about this. Something isn't sitting right. And Jessica just did an amazing job going back, having multiple meetings, if I remember right, with multiple people there to hear each other's perspectives in the room, and negotiated kind of what ended up being the final version between them in a very eloquent way where everybody was happy in the end, which is it was it was an amazing process. So we definitely had to move back our deadline a little bit. We had to move back our celebration once. So build in that flexibility to make sure that the people are at the center of the story and not the process itself and the actual paper itself, that can wait.
That's a great example. Thank you.
Please speak to the balance that needs to be struck between focusing on strength-based assets, but also adequately identifying and solutioning for problems.
That's also a great question. Shall I start, Freya, and then, okay. So I think the question is about asset framing, right? And how do we really write human strength-centered stories? It doesn't mean that we don't talk about the issues that people are dealing with too, and communities that communities are facing. It just means leading with, these are the strengths of the community. This is the power that they hold. And then there is an issue that they can leverage those strengths to address. So it doesn't mean that we don't need, that we can't talk about issues. We certainly can. It's just about how we introduce the people who are at the heart of the story. I think too often, especially marginalized communities, kind of wind up being defined by the issues that are part of their communities that they're facing. But we really want to shift the narrative, right? So that they're defined by the strengths that they bring. Freya, do you want to, or Mark, add to that at all?
Yeah, I guess what's coming up for me is just how important it has been all along the way, I think, for us in systems change to make space for challenges and failure, and that acknowledging it's a part of the work and keeping just an openness in our community around that this is difficult work. There is failure, there are challenges, we're all experiencing them. And I was encouraged with how much folks were really willing and able to talk about not all of their challenges, but some of their key challenges. And I will say that those spaces in the stories, as we use them as tools to reflect in the community of practice, were some of the most interesting places to kind of really dig in. We ended up doing follow-up sessions after each community of practice session where it was an Ask Them Anything, and it was at a different place. It wasn't in our typical community of practice space. It was, it was in a restaurant. It was, somewhere else in a third space, and it was very open. Like, we're gonna tell you everything that we didn't write in some cases. So, I mean, there was lots of curiosity about that. So I'm very grateful to the storytellers and Jessica for being willing to kind of weave that in at the same time.
Can I just jump in? I mean, one of the things that if you think about, I'm thinking now of the nurturing care framework, which many of the people on the call will know, I suppose many don't, just a framework around improving early child development and one of the things that's spoken a lot about in that document is enabling environments. And I think often when we think of systems, we think of health systems, we think of big systems. We don't think of, well, and of course many do, but family systems, or the kinds of systems that enable children to thrive. And we often forget those, particularly if we're doing these single interventions, because we kind of do these interventions almost independent of that non-enabling environment. And there are improvements often, but very often over time they fade, because we haven't also looked at the system, the family system, or the enabling environment. And someone in a recent paper described it as stabilizes. The child just gets, or the person just gets pulled back after some time back into that system. So I just, I think that also just to, and I'm sure everyone made that, but maybe I'm just speaking for myself here, but that systems, it's not just about big systems, but child systems, family system, caregiving systems.
Amazing. I'm going to ask a couple more questions before we wrap up. How are stories perceived by the agencies that might be funding evaluation processes? What Diane says she means is that not everyone might see them as helpful additions to reporting. I'm going to ask the second question as well. Not all individuals are familiar with telling stories or have structured storytelling skills, which can be influenced by culture or gender norm factors. How can we solve this problem in the process?
So maybe I'll take the first part of the question. Jessica and I were invited by Meg Hargraves, the curator of this series, and she did the session before us on equitable evaluation, to present about this at AEA, so the American Evaluation Association conference. I don't know, was that back in November? Anyway, sometime this year. And it was a packed room, so there was a lot of interest. And I would say generally it was well received by a room full of evaluators, but there were some folks, I think, too, that were perhaps stuck in a paradigm. My background is in evaluation, and it was definitely a different type of evaluation and learning that I was practicing for most of my early career. That was, measurable outcomes and logic frames and all of that. So I could see some folks struggling to try to fit this into what they're doing. But I know, Jessica, you've done some work too with some evaluators recently, and I know it was well received. So you can share about that too.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think I have done some work with evaluators, and my big takeaway from that is that it does seem like there's this movement in evaluation practice to start incorporating more story itself in the practice. And what was my takeaway from working with a group of evaluators recently was almost like this big breath of fresh air. It's like, oh, I can be more human in my approach to my evaluative practice. I can work with the people who I'm, the participants, right, who I might be gathering their stories, work with them to just like really center their humanity in what I'm communicating in my evaluative report. So part of that big breath, I think, that I saw the group take was like, oh, we can actually use more direct quotes. We can build in more storytelling elements into the, possibly a more traditional evaluative report wouldn't include those things. But I think just softening the edges maybe is really kind of the takeaway that I had, that people were feeling kind of relieved. So I don't know if that resonates with the group, if you all have had that experience as you're incorporating more story into your evaluation practices, but that's what I took away recently from working with a group of evaluators.
Gosh, we're almost at time, but there's so many good questions in the Q&A. I'm just I think this one is quite important to raise. Like, I think one of the things we tend to forget as researchers is to see continuous consent, especially when one gets immersed in research over an extended period. When you meet a participant that you've interacted with before, you tend to think that the original consent still holds. On the other hand, the participant may feel like they know you and may shrug off the consent process. How do you balance the two situations?
That's a great question, and I think I caught all of it. I'm sorry, it came kind of quickly, but it's
sorry. I'm gonna just paste it in the chat. Sorry, I was just
thank
trying
you.
to
That would
make
be
up for
helpful.
time, but then I clearly.
Thank you. That would be helpful. I think what I heard was it's again about seeking continuous consent. Let's see, I don't see the question yet, but about seeking continuous consent and not working from the assumption that you think you have it the whole time. Is that what I heard? So it's important to just confirm at multiple points, with your participant storytellers, do you feel comfortable, right, sharing your story in the way that it's written after you've produced a draft, like going back to them, like the example that Freya was sharing earlier, where for Stories of Change, we drafted the stories and actually invited the participant storytellers to review the copy, to consent that this is the way they feel comfortable having their story shared. So it's an iterative process in and of itself, and being responsive and flexible, like what Freya said earlier, to what you receive when you ask for consent. So I'm going to check the question. Freya, or Mark, do you have anything to add? I just want to pause and read it again.
I mean, I think just adding that we tried to anticipate as many uses as we could for what we were producing, and let everyone know we were going to have a celebration in the community and we'd be sharing it there. It would be in paper copy and digital copy. They would have their own copies to do the initiatives themselves to share. And examples of how these might get shared and used by folks, so that everyone was aware of that as well. So.
Excellent. All right, with that, I think we'll come to a close. But before we do, I just wanted to flag Silva and Leonard and others are having a really interesting chat about how we're just as a series approaching systems thinking completely. And I think it's totally worth reading. We're discussing systems as if we can choose to change reality using projects or systems thinking. However, reality does not care about our choices. Well, many practitioners have inherently done this, thinking in systems, even if informally. Traditionally, project frameworks often impose narrow constraints that didn't fully capture the complexities of real-world systems. By embracing systems thinking explicitly, we're not adopting a new practice, but are rather recognizing and formalizing the broader and more holistic approaches that have always been at play. This should help us avoid the limitations of past project models and provide a more accurate understanding of how change really occurs. And I think that's a really, great observation of what we're trying to get at, and hopefully we are achieving a bit of that. Shreya, if you want to just quickly slide share so that we can close out. A huge thank you to Freya and Jessica and Mark. Can we get some emoji action going on in support of our incredible panelists? Thank you so much. I love this. I feel like a magician. All right, guys, I feel like a broken record. I don't know how many people have been joining multiple sessions. I feel like I've seen so many names before. But please complete the survey after the session is over. Do not try to beat the system and complete it before the session has even started. Next, we have exciting sessions coming up tomorrow. Register if you haven't. Guys, we're so impressed with the participation. Every session has over 250 people. We want to benefit as many people as possible. So please do promote it and share it widely through your network. Tomorrow we'll be hearing from Johnny Morel and Aisha Yousafzai and how does knowledge of complex systems behavior help us to do better planning and evaluation. And then we'll hear from Sumaya Alva, Emily Stammer, and of course, Mark again. Thank you so much. Complexity-aware monitoring approaches for adaptive and context-specific program improvement. Next, as always, you can go to the ECDAN website. There's a thematic page on systems thinking where you can find a lot more resources. But in addition to that, you can also continue the conversation on ECD Connect on connect.ecdan.org. Next, a big thank you to the ECDAN team, Shreya, who's been our indomitable pillar, Hannah, Catherine, Carol, and Hamid behind the scenes. But finally, you can find the recordings and all the resources that have been talked about, shared across sessions, already uploaded on the website. So yeah, see everybody tomorrow. And again, a big thank you to Freya, Jessica, and Mark. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day wherever you are.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.